Greetings, programs. It's Hanker and Fernale here, back once again to reveal another exposed video. So I have just finished my third journal since this Drunkens and Dragons voyage began. This is the third book that I've filled. I just finished it literally 10 minutes ago, working on my 5e group adventure for this weekend. If you're in any of my groups and you have some games coming up in the next couple days, you might not want to see the last few pages here. But in the interest of pure posterity and the sort of the spirit of the exposed videos, which are so painstaking and slow to create, in the interest of doing that, I can't withhold any pages from here. So if you have any concerns about spoilers, just go away right now. Go over to Crispy Doggo Memes. So this is my third book. When I was setting out on this book, I didn't really have a cool, a lot of people ask me, what do you use? I like a high quality journal. This one is not. It's Strathmore paper, which is nice. It's a pretty opaque paper, and it's very good for bleed control. But this is this is like a $3 notebook. I mean, this is nothing. I just knew that I was starting on a big creative journey, and I needed a notebook, and so I just went to the nearest store and grabbed one, and I needed it now. It was like a bathroom break. It was that urgent. So I wound up with this simple little Strathmore notebook. Now normally I kind of get a lot more specialized with my journals, and having filled this one, my next journal is now probably my most ambitious and craziest one ever. It's an Italian leather-bound hardback that took quite a while to find, and it's going to be really exciting to fill that. But this one, and I think this is a good message. It's just like, it doesn't matter what the notebook is. It's what you do with the notebook that matters. And even this cool Squid Cthulhu thing is just some sticker I found. And then here's this is just a Lady Death sticker that I got at Comic-Con, and it's just like, this is just grungy. So let's dive right into it. This is Exposed, my DM's journal, and this is my third one. So the very beginning, and I think this is kind of why maybe it's salient to reveal this, is the very beginning of this book is literally when ICRPG became a game. This is how I conceived of the game. So we had a little bit of scrawlings and other thoughts that were kept in some Google Docs and stuff that I was working on, but really this is where it began. And something that might surprise you guys is that it did not begin with a consideration of creating rules and creating a system and creating a book. It began with a campaign. So I wanted to make a campaign. It was called Rise of the Serpent, and this is it. This is where I began the campaign. So on this page, I was just working on exactly how I was going to introduce the group to the story. It takes place in Alfheim. I needed at least a few pieces of equipment, which later became part of the character creation system. But at this point, I just wanted to get people at the table. So coming in here, I was basically helping my group to design their party, which was these 4 players. There's Machbir and Trigo, Farron, and Durar. Unfortunately, Trigo was killed in battle. And one of the great things about that, even though at the moment, death can always be very scary and demoralizing for a party, but it really helped us feel, discuss, and understand better ways to create death rules. And there's just no way to do that in a vacuum. You have to be sitting at a table with a character, with a player who cares about their character, to make good death rules. And so this is when all that was happening. So it's just giving quotes to everybody. And this is before the idea of putting quotes on classes, or even that there were classes, or any of that stuff. So here's where, again, I was working with my characters on this left page here to help them develop just how the story would start and how they were sort of already be friends. I'm a big believer in that your adventure is not an origin story. It's a little ways in so that you can have relationships between your characters, because usually your players have relationships. So it's very natural for characters to have relationships. And then this is our very first, this was literally the first ICRPG encounter to ever hit the table for me, which was called Bump in the Road. And it was a little pinch in a canyon with a barricade. and it was an experiment with the concept of effort. So here we have the rest of the first, it was meant to be the first night. It wound up being the first 2 nights of figuring out this artifact called the 100 Stone. This bad guy called Red Hatchet, who was leading a rebellion that had drawn the attention of the king. They go up on top of this rock mass, and there's a flying ship. And this is just, I like to show this stuff because this is exactly how I prepare my games. This is 2 hours of gameplay probably right here. And it's just sort of how I think. And I think it's helpful to reveal that this is really the guts of the hobby. It isn't pretty. It isn't flowery and well written. It's just utility. So to get that first night to work, I knew that I needed some loot, and I needed to roll on it. And this is all I could come up with right here for that first loot table. So some of you who have been playing ICRPG will probably recognize some of these items that made it into the book, but this is where things were taking shape. I mean, literally as we're getting ready for the session, this is where what hearts are and these other concepts started to really form and basically hit the road or find their way onto paper. And this is it's hard to think about. It's a little crazy, but this is 6 months ago. And ICRPG had been in development for the last many years. This is when it started to crystallize, and here it is on paper. So it's fun to look at. Okay, well, anyways, players' tips. And by players' tips, what I meant was I was sort of speaking to that sort of, that inner student, as Bruce Lee would call it. You speak as a teacher to yourself to help yourself see the how and the why of a complex system. And that's really just all this is. It's just writing it down. Here is where we were getting into more of this Rise of the Serpent campaign, and especially this little etching poem here became really central to the campaign. Down in sand, in stone and dark, below the land, a lone rune marked, and down through death in time's black womb, Narlotep in ageless tomb. Wide round dunes and stay to the road, or look the snake in the eye, the world laid low. So that was like my prophecy about how Narlotep was going to rise up out of the desert, and everybody thinks he's going to destroy the world. Then I just was getting more into how room archetypes and adventure archetypes work, and this is just thinking it out in a big mess. And this is a picture of Bacon right here. That's Bacon. So originally I was going to make special rolling boxes that were custom made to work with the rules inside of ICRPG. I wound up not doing it because it just felt very pushed and very contrived, and we liked how our table was starting to clean up relative to our 5e game, so I didn't want to add a lot of styrene to that table. We had a really nice, clean, fun table, but I was just brainstorming. And then here's where the brain horror actually came into existence, and the first time I ever started thinking about how monsters could function in ICRPG. So what do we got here? This looks like just scrawling. So as many of you know, there's a section in the book about how to create monsters and give them abilities, and really this is where it began. And this is literally just sitting there drinking a pint and just writing down whatever comes to mind, whether it's a good or a bad idea. So some of it makes it in, some of it doesn't, some of it's refined. I'm a really big believer in just going with it, just write. Just work the muscles, and later you can be judicious and you can make decisions and you can decide. But if you decide right as the creative moment is happening, then you'll never get that chance. And a lot of people over-edit their work. ICRPG is a game of how and not what. I'm not sure what exactly that means, but I'm sure at the moment it was very important to me. So finally I'm getting some loot that was getting a bigger, list, because I realized really quickly that the appetite for loot in the game into the 3rd and 4th session is very high, and the appetite for spells and different items is very high. And so I just was forced to really put some deeper thought into loot. I needed to get more loot. I needed to think it out. And this just became an exploration of rule bending. And yeah, it's just kind of the scrawlings of a madman. And of course, I'm always sort of speaking in philosophical axioms to myself to get myself rallied up. So here again, visually thinking. So still working on loot, and then trying to find a clear rule for help is what's underride right here. So I noticed right away that my players always are wanting to help each other, and the rules are always a little bit different here and there, and it just instantly caught my eye that we needed a really tight solution in ICRPG for help. And this is all part of how effort came together. Much more Moloch. So taking a little break from ICRPG design, and if you guys have seen the Moloch Madness video with the mapless maze and the final boss fight with Moloch, this is where it was all designed. There's nothing very glamorous here. It's just sort of scribblings and little bullet points. And half of it goes in and half of it never goes anywhere. And that's just how I think. So it's just, I try to write it down. I put DCs on things. I try to get maps that are at least functional enough to get my idea down. And yeah, so that's where that video was designed. And then, boy, this is when you really know it's a Dungeon Master's book, because you have some big mess with hit points all marked down. And a couple of weird notes involving some kind of story item that happened, like everybody has this kind of mess in their books. So here was the first time that I played 7D system with DMG, and I just needed to make my own notes on DMG's game system, because I always need to think sort of in my own terms to have an intuitive sense of the game. So I did myself a little cheat sheet. And it was really fun, actually. Really fun system. I'm excited to see when he comes out with that. This page is about additive and subtractive space over here. And I really don't have a thesis for this, is why it wound up not being a video. But to me, it's very intriguing, is that sometimes designing dungeons, we carve out of solid matter. And other times when designing dungeons, we build with solid matter in a void. And I think, especially watching Black Magic Craft, I noticed that he almost always works in positive space, and that was very interesting to me, because I almost always work in negative space, and it's just extremely interesting, and I don't really have anything fascinating to say about it. I just was documenting thinking about it. Again, you guys know me, I'm a really big believer in, if you think about a thing and write down what you're thinking about, it'll stick in your mind, and it's a good way to try to get smarter. Okay, so here we have some cosmology for Alfheim. The different worlds, and this is back when ICRPG was going to have 4 or even 6 world settings, and so I was just working on what the actual sort of cosmic layout was, so that I could come up with more world settings that would all be consistent. This left one here is a bit of a spoiler on some other things that nobody knows about yet, so I'm not going to explain what's going on there. The right one is a video that's coming up soon that I keep promising that I still haven't gotten around to, which is the sort of final or near final chapter of A Burning in New Haven. So this is a graveyard behind Harold Manor that leads down to this massive dungeon where the sort of the Dark Brotherhood, if you remember the follow-up to Burning in New Haven, the Vault of Duke Harold. This is the final chapter there, and it's this great dungeon. I just haven't gotten around to building it, but I know I want to because I like the design. Here we got another hit point mess, and another, silly marking down and tracking NPCs. And then these, you can tell when I write really crappy like this, that I'm taking notes from players as they're talking to try to really catch those moments and those moments of impulse when, honesty is just so wide open, and there's just no replacing that. That's the solid gold of game design. Here is when I had this realization that I was absolutely certain I was going to do Warp Shell in ICRPG, and I started working with it more. And at first I was going to do no setting, and then I realized maybe I'm going to do a setting, and I was going to do post-apocalypse, and I was going to do sort of Ice Age, and I was going to do all this stuff. And this is how I work through these concepts, is I just try to see how they connect, where do they go places that I like them to go. And then there's this cool little guy on this mechanized sentry tower. So those of you who know the book, Encounter Archetypes is right here, and this is really when it hit the road. This is the very first sketch that I did. I may have posted this on Facebook, but I just had one of those epiphanies, and this was actually my first version of classes too, is that they were going to have 2 specialty dice, and You know, this whole thing, and it really just was very clunky and didn't work out, but it led us to the classes that we have today that I think are really good. But yeah, look at those room archetypes. So those pretty much went right into the book. So here's more crazy doodles that you may or may not recognize that sort of wound up in ICRPG. And again, these are sort of thought tools of trying to understand how concepts progress and ways to boil them down into more modular systems of thinking, rather than each time that you make content, you have to sort of dig into your creative instincts again and anew. And I wanted to try to help myself and hopefully you guys break some of that difficulty. You know, it's really tough to face that blank page. And so I'm always trying to work on conceptual tools to help me with the blank page. And then, you know, I think I've probably had a few beers or something here because I write these like axiomatic quotes, you know, where I quote myself, you know, like if the beginning and the end are not linked, it's not a story. Wonder is not surprise. It's the confirmation of what you already imagined. Or only two things move us, love and hate. And fear is only what stands between. You know, these are sort of massive philosophical, you know, axioms. Silly. So here's where I was trying to find the design of the Zill and the Warp Shell and some of the other elements that are in Warp Shell. And I wanted to see some kind of ship or idea about what the Warp Shell is and how its mechanics work, but visually what it was. And you know, sometimes you can just jump right to the Sharpie and just nail a drawing, and other times, you know, it takes a lot of different drawings to try to find something that's going to click and that feels new and it feels fun. Oh, this is a funny one over here. This is an odd looking page, right? This is sitting at the bar where I do a lot of my writing because I like the sort of the chatter of a social space. Helps me focus. Then what I was doing was adapting what real people were saying in the bar into like Harbinger quotes. And then here we have some adventure ideas for trying to pull Warp Shell together. And again, still working on what the guts of the book were going to be. More sketches trying to figure out the Warp Shell and the shapes and the visual language there. And then also trying to figure out this sort of story architectural concept about, you know, how can stories be systematized in a way that's useful? And, you know, I don't know if I succeeded in that or not, but this is just a chronicle of how I was trying to think through it. When I knew I had an invitation to play in Harbinger, I right away started experimenting with Harbinger character ideas. And, I don't know, sort of inspired by Outlander and by Dead Space, some other things. Yeah, so I was just kind of thinking through it. Again, more, you know, considering my first Harbinger character, and this is actually it's not drawn on this sheet at all, but this is the moment that I had the Murph epiphany, and I realized I wanted to make Murph. I'm sure you guys saw that funny video I did on Friday night. I got so excited. So here's what I was calling ICRPG 2.1. So I think we're well into our test campaign now, long enough to have changed things significantly, and I wanted to make sure that at the end of the session I got all that on paper. Here's where I designed actually something that hasn't been revealed yet, which is a Harbinger adventure called A Day in the Wake. I really hope to run this online. Me and the Absolute Tabletop guys all got so busy, I wound up never running this game. But it's a little bit of a blend between the ICRPG treatment of Deep Space and Harbinger, and it's a pretty wild, kind of super deadly experience. And then also right here, I'm mixing in. I was taking notes as I was playing the first sort of hour of Zelda, because I just thought the way they did those opening experiences was so great. It was worth taking notes. Here's a sort of sketch or doodle of how I first imagined the Harbinger itself as this sort of colossal ship, and I was really inspired by that vertical ship in Thor: Dark World, which I thought was really cool and kind of a little bit underexploited for how cool its design was. Yeah, and then the rest of this is just my bullet notes on running A Day in the Wake. Then we come all the way back here to my new 5th edition group. And this is where I designed the first night for my 5th edition group, which is called Pilgrims of Elturel. And again, just, doing my bullet points on what I know I want to do, getting my initial map, which is almost always a sort of side view with a little perspective in it. And then trying to explain all the questions I have and just jotting it all down in a mess. Oh, this is great. This is when I played in The Tomb That Walks as Deck 1 with Matt Click as the Dungeon Master. And that was an absolutely fantastic game. And this is basically my character sheet right here. Cooper. So when I was thinking about doing some character portraits for my player compatriots in A Tomb That Walks, I just did this sketch of Tim Carney's character, this sort of fire-scarred mechanist, and I actually was really happy with the final artwork that I did for him. But this was the first moment that I was thinking about it. I don't know why it says Astra Scanner right there, but it sure does. And then to the right is just reading Perilous Wilds and thinking in depth about what was so brilliant about that little book, because it is just pure wonderfulness. And here's a great page to make everybody feel great about aborted creativity. Is like, I think I was trying to draw the Frozen King from Absolute Tabletop, and it just was so awful. I just bailed. It was just such a crappy drawing. And, I draw every single day quite a bit, and I have these kind of moments that are just like, oh God, that's terrible. Then on the right side, we see this is working on the sort of the GM section, just getting started. And after reading Hubris and 13th Age, and even going back to my rules cyclopedia, for 2nd edition and stuff, and just trying to catch all these little things that I liked and really boil them down. Here's just more thinking. I mean, how many times can I explain this? But yeah, trying to see rhythm, trying to set notes, trying to keep things in memory. So what right here we have the first view of like the monster list, which all of these did not make it in the book because it's very time consuming to make mechanically unique monsters. But there might be some spoilers for some future wonderfulness in here. The Mantids, for example, I really want to get those in, so maybe that'll be in a Warp Shell adventure. Yes, the Chromatic Drakes. So only the Black Drake wound up in the ICRPG book, but I want to do all these Chromatic Drakes in ICRPG. Right, in the Rise of the Serpent campaign, we have these crystal worms, and this is where the crystal worms came from. And then you want to talk about sloppy prep. This is just like a pseudo paragraph of like, a quick explanation to myself. So, when questions and perception rolls start coming in, I have answers. Now, this was really enjoyed. This is where I came up with my Soul of Stars game for Harbinger. This was the realization that Murph's consciousness had been sort of expelled into the wider universe and captured in this old forge floating in the atmosphere of Bastion, and how he had gone on this cosmic journey and realized all these things, and he wanted to be instantiated again, that he had traveled through time, and kind of a tribute to sort of Arthur C. Clarke style science fiction. And was really, really inspired at this moment, and still am, by Harbinger, and just can't wait to tell stories in that space. And here are the mechanics page. So this is, it doesn't get more exposed than this. This is exactly what happened in the game, but written in crap mode. And we never did get Reeves his first session reward. We need to get around to that. Prosthetic power cells. So here is just making sure I have track of all my campaigns. So for every little bullet dot you see here, that's a campaign. So yeah, 7 campaigns or so going on at the same time. Crazy. And here, when I write like this means I'm either extremely tired or have had too many beers, because this is all but worthless. This is silliness. But this is where I wrote the initial portion of Savages of Cath, which is our ICRPG online game. And I had to come back and kind of, mine these scrawlings and try to turn it into something. And that's what this page is. So when I have my wits much more about me, then I get the mapping done and the concepts are a lot clearer. And that way, when I go for my reminder sort of moment before the session, this is much more useful. Hey, remember that death video all about, handling TPKs and stuff? This is where I figured all that out. And there's the end of that portion there. And then if you guys have watched the Moloch Black Ocean video, this is the concept work for Black Ocean. So you see I've actually kind of drawn things twice here, because on the right side I would just sort of accidentally draw as I was imagining, and then on the left side I wanted to draw with a little more time and detail, and get better photos and so forth and document my work. But this is where that whole little story was plotted. And then getting into the sort of the love poem between Rogar and Brilda in the Black Ocean, and then all the way back to the Rise of the Serpent campaign, where they're summoning these giant titans and riding them across the ocean and all kinds of crazy stuff. And here's a video that I haven't done yet, so you get a little peek into the future. But I do want to do this video. These are my D20 bullets on the creative method. What is the creative method? I mean, what is creative method itself? It's a huge area of human thought. There's a ton of research that you can do if you're interested in it, like I am, about what it is to be creative and how you can get more out of your mind, creatively speaking. And this was my best attempt at the key bullets. So, yeah, I think that'll be a fun one to talk about. Wow, all the way back deep into the Rise of the Serpent campaign and the mechanics. And look at this insane flowchart. This is just, I had no idea what the players were going to do, so I needed to be prepared with some scenario options. I really wanted them to have substantive choice. So I had to know what the outcomes of those choices could be, and at least have a little bit of prep, so that they really can choose where things are going to go. And they're just trying to figure out the stinking pricing on ICRPG. Man, it's tough to price products when you make them yourself. These were more of trying to summarize some campaigns and get my thoughts clear. And I think after I drew the little brackets, I was like, oh God, no, I don't want to deal with this. So more about the Black Ocean. So this is how much work goes into, one of those videos with all those encounters. Is like, I would figure the whole thing out as if I were running it, and then I run it for you guys on YouTube rather than for a table. But it goes through all the same preparation steps. Oh boy, look at this bad boy. Here is all the 100 cards in ICRPG Volume 3 written down, all 100. So I work right from this list as I'm drawing for that project. All science fiction in that volume. And then here we go. These are my initial notes right here on the expansion that just came out yesterday. So that's awesome. And then a little bit of stuff on, trying to decide what was going to be in there. And, some of it rose and some of it fell. And then this was when I started thinking about Viking Death Squad. And Viking Death Squad is designed here in a couple more pages. But first we had a Knight of Savages of Cath to play. And this is where the Agnar Riders came into play, which was this sort of night of sort of siege gameplay. And this is where I figured out there's the little sort of idea for the 4 lanes of the Agnar Riders and how that mechanic was going to work. Here's working with Derek over at Drozrug Games on Home Gang, which will be out later this year. And then this was demonstrating the log video for you guys last week that was live, so it was done right there. And look at this. I don't even want to show this. These are ideas for Ghost Mountain. Super spoiler. More Ghost Mountain stuff. Ghost Mountain is the 3rd setting for ICRPG that's going to be coming. And then Viking Death Squad. Anyone going to AtCon, do not watch this, okay? Just stop the video right now. This is where I designed Viking Death Squad. And there isn't a lot of art here, so there's not a ton of spoilers, but everything is spoiled right here. So these are the sort of 3 portions, kind of in 4 groups of what happens. Again, thinking in bullets that I can remember. And then here are the maps. And these maps were generated from the playtest, which I did just over a week ago. And it was a blast. And so what I did was, instead of designing the maps, I kind of improvised the maps with terrain, with 3D terrain, and then kind of documented how it all went down. Look at this. Here's tracking hit points again. Just a big silly mess. This is sitting up at the barn where we have our horse. And I was just in a lawn chair and just sat by the fence and took a little while and just slowed down a little bit and drew a stick in the fence. This is a symbol from our 5e campaign. This is kind of the, again, the god of dawn is being pursued. And then here's where I was brainstorming out the warp shell loot, which all found its way into the expansion. And more of that. A video that's upcoming called Art of the One Shot, and this is trying to make notes there. I don't even know if I'm going to do that video because I think people are already so good at one shots. And this is a video that I'm very excited to reveal here pretty soon called The Problem of Evil. This is an ancient philosophical sort of puzzle that I want to have a talk with about everybody. And this is kind of where I was figuring out some of the keys. And then, as you guys well know, we're almost caught up to the present moment. Here is the last flight of the Red Sword and where that was originally brainstormed. The Tortons. So right when Matt Shaker was coming up with the Tortons, I wanted to get some sketches out before I did the final art. I'm coming, guys, but my speed is too low. And then here is one of the upcoming ICRPG adventure expansions called the Doom Vault. So if you look in your book, the very first adventure hook in the Alfheim World Primer mentions the Doom Vault, and this is the entire dungeon and adventure to go with that story hook. And wow, this is a poetic piece about Milo Underbottom. He's going to be a huge NPC in Doom Vault and some other adventures, and this is a sort of a poetry piece about who he became, and we'll be learning more about that as time goes forward. And finally, 5e players, if you're in the group, do not watch this portion, but this is my game tomorrow. So we are right up to the present moment, Secrets of Eltergard, and this is a story where I'm going to take a tribunal outcome, which was a request for some elegance in the games rather than so much ugliness. And it's really an insightful and intriguing request that we have elegance and beauty in our game, not always just fear and ugliness. And I really think it's a brilliant creative seed. And this is the bullet sheet and map that I'm working from to create that gameplay with that inspiration. And look at this, man, the end of book 3. There it is, the final page. So if you guys were watching, this is literally today. So this ink is probably partially wet, but this is the end of book 3. So it was about a 6-month project. It was the entirety of the ICRPG core book was designed, the Pilgrim's campaign, all my Harbinger work so far, the Black Ocean, volume 3 of ICRPG, the Viking Death Squad, and just, wow, I mean, what a process to see all this summarized like this. It's just really fun. And there you go. So now I'm going to move on. So there is that one. And if you stick with me just a second, oof, I'm going to get up here. And I'm over here. The next book, this is going to be book 4 since Drunkens and Dragons started. I'm going to really shoot the moon on this one, and I'm very excited to, who knows, it may take a year or more, but it's going to be a great one when I get around to exposing it. So goodbye, book 3. You were great. You were awesome. I still have to use you for about 2 weeks for notes. And I give to you book 4. There it is. Oh. This thing is colossal. I really went for it on this thing. It is a beautiful, beautiful book with metal bindings. It's all leather bound. And I am going to fill this animal with awesome D&D. That is my goal. And I'm going to freaking do it. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Really always love to show this process because so much labor and love goes into these little journals, and they really are the breathing lungs and beating heart of my tabletop games. So I'm glad I can share it with you all. Thanks for tuning in. Hanker and Fernell here signing off with Drunkens and Dragons, and strength, honor, beer, and remember, get out there, play D&D like a big old badass.